Hello there, I'm Ryan, and welcome to my channel, Analyze This Mr. Bond. And today we are analyzing the unofficial spin-off of the James Bond franchise, the Harry Palmer films, which you may have guessed from these glasses. The Yvan by Curry and Paxton, which are the famous glasses worn by the character of Harry Palmer in the Harry Palmer films, The Ipcress File, Funeral in Berlin, and Billion Dollar Brain. Most people don't understand that the Harry Palmer films really were a kind of unofficial spin-off of the Bond series. When the Bond series was in its heyday, spy writer Len Deighton, who wrote the Ipcress File, was brought on to work on the screenplay of From Russia with Love. Len Deighton failed to deliver a proper screenplay for From Russia with Love, but he did become friends with the producer Harry Saltzman, who at the time was half of Eon Productions alongside Cubby Broccoli, and Harry Saltzman ended up procuring the rights to the Ipcress File and the Harry Palmer books in general, and started to create a series around those books that would run in parallel to the Bond movies and be a kind of counterpoint to them. These films were made by many of the same creative individuals that shaped the classic Bond films. Allow me to pull up a list here. The Ipcress File, released in 1965, not only had producer Harry Saltzman, but it had Joanna Harwood contributing to the script. She had really shaped those formative Connery adventures. It had John Barry, who defined the Bond music sound, doing another form of spy music here for a different character. It had editor Peter Hunt, who would go on to shape the editing style of the Connery run up until he directed his own Bond movie, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which many argue is the best directed Bond film of them all. It had production design from Ken Adam. He actually won an award for his production design on the Ipcress File, and art direction by Peter Merton, who was also associated with the classic Bond movies. Its sequel, Funeral in Berlin, was directed by the director of Goldfinger, Guy Hamilton. Again, Ken Adam and Peter Merton returned. Roger Spottiswoode, who would direct Tomorrow Never Dies in 1997, was actually one of the uncredited assistant editors on Funeral in Berlin. And then the third Harry Palmer film, Billion Dollar Brain, brought in production designer Sid Caine, who worked on a bunch of Bond movies, and it had a title sequence by Maurice Binder, who notably created the memorable visuals that defined the Bond title sequences. And I'd argue that the title sequence for Billion Dollar Brain is better than most of the Bond titles. It's one of the great title sequences ever produced for a motion picture. That is a pretty significant set of Bond film creatives. And Harry Saltzman really saw something in Len Deighton's work that he could really build into a strong counterpoint to Bond. Bond is a luxurious character. He inhabits this world of the elite. He may not be fully elite himself, but he went to a privileged school background, and he inhabits this world of rich, sinister men. He's a person who can camouflage himself amongst the elite to find the nefarious individuals who are going to threaten the world from positions of wealth and power. Harry Palmer is a working class operator. He inhabits this sort of grungy, grimy world. He's having to really scrape a living. He's expendable. He knows he's expendable. His superiors treat him as though he's a throwaway operative, but he's always coming out successful in the end. Len Deighton is actually, for my money, the best writer of spy fiction that there ever was. He combines so much of what we love about Ian Fleming's writing, this capacity for vivid atmosphere and ambiance, with a sense of melancholy and existential threat that you would get from, Jean le Carré. So he's kind of the best of both worlds, and he's just an exceptional prosmith. His writing is impeccable and vivid and memorable, and his dialogue is really dry and funny and clever in a way that keeps you turning the page. The films do and don't resemble Len Deighton's work, much like the Bond films take elements of Fleming but tend to go in their own direction with them. The Ipcress File which came out in 1965, really does its own thing with the material. It puts Michael Caine into the persona of Harry Palmer. Harry Palmer is the name we associate with this character, but it actually doesn't come from the books. The book's protagonist is a more ambiguous character without a clear name. He's kind of just a shadowy operator. But in the films, he's Harry Palmer, and he's a much more defined character. He's a character who is a working class, lower rung operative. He's been somewhat blackmailed into serving the British intelligence operation. He has a criminal background, so he doesn't have a lot of leverage. And he is there working his way, trying to survive. It's not the world of luxurious casinos. It's back alleys and Cold War checkpoints. And I have really come to appreciate how the Harry Palmer films, in this sort of grimier, more grounded vocabulary, still create this sense of expansive fantasy and fun. These are films of biting, dry wit anchored in the star-making performance of Michael Caine as Harry Palmer. Harry Palmer is an absolutely hysterical character in all of these films. Michael Caine walks this sort of weird lane of nerdy cool, but still tough. That's Michael Caine's unique appeal. He's this sort of boyish, charming, impish individual who's also effortlessly cool and can also be tough. And he's always peering out behind these thick acetate frames, which I think are just such a striking character trait because they really focus you on Michael Caine's eyes and the expressions he's always making. He's an observer. He's an intelligent operator who's always looking around to see what other people have missed. And he's navigating these pretty dense, complex, twisty conspiracies. These movies are heavily, almost overplotted in their layers of betrayals and double crosses and fake outs. You get a kind of excitement in watching Harry Palmer be this continual improviser navigating the frontiers of the Cold War. James Bond was a character who really spoke to my inner child. I really thrilled watching James Bond attack a volcano lair with an army of ninjas alongside him in films like You Only Live Twice. There's such a visceral thrill to that sort of surreal, grand fantasy. But there's something about the sort of lived-in griminess of the Harry Palmer films that speaks to me now. This sense that Harry Palmer can be this sort of strong underdog. I realized as I came into my adulthood that I was ultimately more Michael Caine than I was Sean Connery. So it makes sense that this character would hold that level of appeal to me. But these films are really fun, rooted in the 1960s, that unfolded alongside Bond at the height of Bond's popularity. So the Ipcress File comes out in 1965, the same year as Thunderball, so you are getting this really big explosion of spy mania across the world. And the Ipcress File becomes the sort of thinking man's version of James Bond, at least as far as the press receives the Ipcress File. The Ipcress File wins awards that Bond doesn't. It's kind of seen as a little bit more literary and intelligent. And it is and it isn't. It's got some of the most stylish cinematography ever put in a motion picture. It's so angular and strange, like cameras peering out from behind lampshades as though you're always surveilling the people in the midst of the film in Ipcress File. The cinematographer was Otto Heller, who is one of the great cinematographers. It's no surprise that many films have taken a lot of inspiration from it, not the least of which was Quantum of Solace, which directly cited the Ipcress File as a strong key reference for its own approach to cinematography. You don't get to appreciate that as much in Quantum of Solace because it's edited so tightly, but you will see, if you watch the Ipcress File, a similar approach to how they're doing camera setups in very angular and sometimes obtuse ways. The Ipcress File is a little bit more downbeat. There is a sense in which Harry Palmer in this film is very vulnerable. You're really not sure if he's going to make it out alive. He is not in control of his own destiny the way James Bond is as this assured, commanding character. He's really on his back foot the whole time. That changes a little bit by the time you get to the sequel, Funeral in Berlin, which was directed by Guy Hamilton of Goldfinger. And Guy Hamilton certainly brings a bit more of the Goldfinger ethos when he comes to direct Funeral in Berlin. It has some of the same style. It has Otto Heller is doing the cinematography again, and you still have the same visual production design from Ken Adams. So it has some of that feeling, but the music is a lot more jaunty and fun. John Barry only did the first film, so the music switches to something that is a little bit more peppy, and Harry Palmer becomes a little bit more of a parody of himself. Harry Palmer is a character who is certainly working class, but he's still a womanizer like Bond. He's effortlessly charming and witty and clever, and so he's always, got a girl at his apartment. He is a food obsessive, so he loves to cook, so there's always lots of scenes of Harry Palmer being fussy over food preparation or how he makes his coffee. The title sequence of the first Harry Palmer film, The Ipcress File, famously unfolds over Harry Palmer getting out of bed and making his morning coffee in a very ritualistic way. Those sort of tics define Harry Palmer alongside his very dry, sardonic wit and his sort of contempt for his superiors. He's very much a smart aleck in the sort of dry British way. And all three of these movies give Michael Caine some of the best dialogue he's been given in any movie to really play with, because Michael Caine has such a natural gift for dry humor. So Palmer becomes this sort of endearing character, and by the time you get to Funeral in Berlin, he's become a little bit more of a caricature of himself. Funeral in Berlin does feel like it's really almost a Bond movie with a slightly grimier sort of paint. Michael Caine is moving through it with a lot more style and swagger. Part of the premise of the sequel is that after the Ipcress File, Palmer has gotten a salary boost, so his apartment's nicer, his wardrobe is a lot chicer, but he's still on assignment and he's still very vulnerable. Though you don't get the sense that Palmer is in as much danger as he was in the prior installment. Billion Dollar Brain is famously kind of a disaster of a movie. I really love the first half of Billion Dollar Brain. It's directed by Ken Russell, if that name means anything to you, and it goes in this sort of explosively avant-garde direction. I think the story is really ahead of its time. If you watch Billion Dollar Brain, it feels like it's a story that you could almost one-to-one tell today in terms of how it's dealing with the global political situation, how it's dealing with technology. But it's a hallucinatory experience, and the third act just completely crumbles under its own weight. It was an infamously troubled production that had a lot of difficulty finding its bearings, a lot of on-location shooting disasters, so it really loses its way, but it has such magnificent aspects. It has a wonderful film score, it has that magnificent title sequence, which I've already spoken about, and again, Michael Caine is just impeccably funny in it, and for me, that trilogy is pretty endearing. I return to these movies regularly. I return to them now, I think, as much as I return to many of the Bond movies. As much as I appreciate Bond's brawn and his luxuriousness, I really just enjoyed the scrappiness of Harry Palmer. It really feels like you could watch the Harry Palmer films in parallel to the Connery films of that era. You could almost alternate them depending on when they released, and you would have this sort of wonderful portrait of Bond in the upper echelons of the spy elite and Harry Palmer in the spy underground, and they complement each other stylistically, narratively, and really feel like siblings to me in a way, and you feel that in the shared stylistic DNA that you get from some of the creative team contributing to both films, but also in the ways that they just sharply contrast and complement each other. Harry Palmer and James Bond are both improvisers. They're just improvisers who are working at different levels of society. And also just cinematically, I think all three of the Harry Palmer films are stylistically striking. Even Billion Dollar Brain, which is a mess, is a gorgeous film to look at. It has some rich, evocative images that have stayed with me. So this is just me begging you to watch the Harry Palmer movies. So do it. Do it for yourself, especially as we're waiting for Bond 26 and you've already seen all the Bond movies a bunch of times like me, and you're looking for something a little bit new, but something that's Bond adjacent, still plugged into that sense of 1960s, effortless, cool. The Harry Palmer films are right there waiting for you. I've been speaking as though there are only 3 Harry Palmer films. There are 2 additional made-for-TV Harry Palmer films starring Michael Caine that came out many years later after the original 3. They don't really share any of the original's creative vision and really aren't based on the works of Deighton at all. So I just like to pretend those don't exist, but I do want to take this moment to acknowledge that those films do exist, and intriguingly enough, they put Michael Caine alongside Sean Connery's son, Jason Connery. So Michael Caine stars alongside Jason Connery in those 2 made-for-television movies, but I don't really want to think about those made-for-television movies. For me, Harry Palmer is a character that exists in a film trilogy rooted in the 1960s. Let me know if many of you have seen all 3 Harry Palmer films. I know many of you have probably seen the Ipcress File, but I bet you most of you have not seen its sequels, Funeral in Berlin and Billion Dollar Brain. So let me know if you have seen them, and if you have, what you think of them. And as always, I'll catch you in the next one.